Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the finale and last season in this incredible collection of stories from the great mind of Jack LaFountain. Available now over on the Amazon bookstore and various other outlets. And of course I'll leave a link to those in the description box below. Please as ever, do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Tracks. If at first you don't succeed. The springtime story. Let's get straight into that. An introduction. If at first you don't succeed, it's set in my new home, north central Alabama. I had only lived in Alabama for a month when I began researching this story in, as you might guess, the same familiar source, the encounter reports of the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, or BFRO. I was hoping to repeat the luck I had with Rock Creek Karma and find something close to home. And once again, I was rewarded. I found 2 cases in nearby Coleman County and travelled to the location of one of the reports. My original intent with this springtime story has been to feature a more aggressive Bigfoot, as up until this season, my Bigfoots have been, if not actually helpful, to the humans, only mildly aggressive, which, to my way of thinking, is the attitude I most often associate with these creatures. By saying this, I will probably get a more violent reaction from some of my fellow Bigfoot believers than from any Sasquatch I may ever encounter. But the bulk of the information I found on these giants paints them as more threatening than physically violent. That may be due to our willingness to retreat from threat rather than Bigfoot's nature, and that remains to be determined. In any case, neither of the encounters that I uncovered in Alabama were particularly aggressive, so I added in the Theodore Roosevelt story as a nod to the very few accounts of actual killings, to lend an element of threat to the narrative. The BFRO report, incidentally, included the account of the investigators' calls being answered in this Coleman County incident, making it, to my mind, a confirmed encounter. In the actual report, the person having the original encounter did indeed go back for a 3rd visit to the site, only to be frightened away by the proximity of the rank smell that was present at the first sighting. As we used to say in my psychiatric nursing days, you can't make this stuff up. Chapter 1. Eric exited the interstate in the same numb, mechanical fashion he'd been driving it for the past hour or so. Dodge City, he mumbled to himself. Seems out of place. He made a right-hand turn from the off-ramp onto Alabama Highway 69 and flipped down the sun visor. The usual interstate exit collection of gas stations and fast food restaurants disappeared behind him, giving way to rows of tall pines, black oaks, and eastern hemlocks. The map he'd looked over the night before deemed this as a scenic route, and Eric's eyes saw it, but his mind was so far away, the beauty was lost on him. His thoughts were in an endless loop at a conversation that had ended the latest in his string of failed relationships. "I'm sorry, Eric," Izzy said. "I'm not going tomorrow." Izzy was Isabella Santi, the woman he had been dating for 2 months, under the mistaken impression she might care for him. Her words hit him like a fist. He had planned and paid for this late spring semester getaway over a month before. They were going with friends for 3 days of off-road muddy fun before finals. "What?" he blurted in answer to her surprise announcement. "Why? What's wrong? You're not sick, are you?" "No," she said, and then she brought the hammer down on his heart. "Look, Eric, you're a nice guy." He didn't need to hear more than that. He knew all the following lines by heart, but he listened anyway, rather than just hang up. "I just don't feel the same way about you as you do me. It's no good to try and make more of it than that. But we can still be friends." and then he hit the little red phone icon, ending a call. Soon, he'd been friends with every woman in northern Alabama. Well, maybe just those at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. The sound of his tires leaving the road for the shoulder jolted him back to the present. Concentrate on the road, he told himself. The sun was sitting low on the treetops, enough to free him from the glare. He raised the visor and took his own advice, focusing on the black ribbon of highway between the walls of green. What did he have to do to please them? Must he become the stereotypical cheating, lying man that women said they hated? Well, those kind of guys never seemed to be without a go. We can still be friends. Why did women always say that to him? Were they storing nuts for winter? Why not be honest and just say, "You're not worth my time, Mr. Nice Guy"? Probably because they're so geared to openness and honesty, he said aloud, and with a forced laugh. That and the need for someone to commiserate with when they are the ones who were dumped or cheated on. He was bitter, and he hated it. The bitter vanished in a flash of reddish brown that exploded from the side of the road. He slammed on the brakes and laid on a horn, fighting the wheel to keep his Jeep and trailer pointed forward as it skidded to a halt. The deer's wide eyes seemed to say it could not be more scared than it already was. It was moving faster than he had ever seen one move. His grill guard bumped his hind quarters. The doe stumbled a step, but recovered and stayed upright, streaking hellbent for the trees on the far side of the road. As she regained her footing, a towering mass of long brown hair came charging from the trees off to his right. The moment stretched out in slow motion before his eyes. The massive giant leapt onto the road, and with a rock the size of a bowling ball cupped in his hand, leaves glued to its hairy butt, its fluid gliding gait carried it like the wind, a wind that stank of dead meat. And the creature was only in front of him for a few seconds, but the smell that lingered, it was rank. The musky, god-awful stench of a huge skunk. It glanced at him, barely turning its head as it blew by and was lost in the trees. He let the Jeep creep forward to parallel the place where the creature entered the woods. He stopped and got out of his truck in a haze of amazement. Looking back later, he realized it was only one of several stupid things he would do on that trip. He didn't really expect to see anything more of the creature, not at the rate that it was moving. Creature? Was that a Bigfoot? He thought. Sure as shit, Bigfoot. No doubt it was after the deer. It probably didn't give him a thought. I was a female. The thought popped up, unbidden. His boots crunched on the stray gravel of the shoulder as he looked up into the trees. 50 feet beyond the tree line, there stood the creature. Eric came to a wide-eyed, breath-holding halt. Oh, damn! The word slipped from him. Man and Bigfoot stood exchanging stares for several endless seconds. The creature grunted at him in a kind of raspy growl that vibrated within his chest. He wanted to turn and run, but his body had refused. Finally, the Bigfoot puffed out hairless cheeks, blew out a dismissive huff of stale breath, turned and disappeared into the trees. Eric still did not move. He stood silently staring at the point where the Bigfoot vanished, until the blare of a horn and the sound of a car speeding along behind him reminded him he'd parked in the middle of the highway. He hustled back to the Jeep still in a daze, replaying and denying the entire episode as he went. When he turned into Stony Lonesome off-highway vehicle park 5 minutes later, he was still operating in an unthinking, mechanical way. But Bigfoot had also chased Izzy from his mind, at least for the moment. He pulled the Jeep into line with the other pickups and trailers and walked to the office to check in. As he stepped through the door, panic seized him. And to his left, a hairy, 8-foot-tall monster stood amid the shelves of the t-shirts and off-road supplies. He staggered back a step before realizing the creature, it wasn't real. "You okay?" asked a man in a bright yellow shirt seated near the counter. Oh, yeah," Eric said. "I need to check in." Afterwards, Eric paused at the door and hooked a thumb towards the Bigfoot near the far wall. "Say," he said, "have you ever seen anything like that around here?" "Nah, but I heard stories," he said. "Some kind of group came here once. They said they were doing research on it. Can't say I believe in it. But these guys obviously did, judging by the money they had tied up and all the equipment loaded on their fancy truck." Eric said. "Did he find anything?" "Not that I ever heard about." He shook his head. You have fun out there." "Yeah, thanks." Eric gave him a wave and slipped out, only to quickly stick his head back inside. "Do you happen to remember what those guys call themselves?" "Nope, just some initials," he said with a shake of his head. "Bigfoot Research something or other, I think." Eric returned to his truck and looked at the gear stowed on it. A wave of resentment rolled over him. What was it about him that they always left all the setup to him? Same nice guy crap, as always, he thought. He shrugged it away and began setting up the camp. He got the 3 tents up, beds inflated, set up a cook table, and arranged chairs in a semicircle around the fire pit. That done, he got a fire going and dropped down in one of the camp chairs with a cold beer. The best a phone search could come up with was something called the Alabama Bigfoot Project. He wasn't sure that these were the people the manager told him about, but they would do. He went to their website and filed a report, surprised at the details they asked. The beer did nothing to numb his heartbreak or slow the racing visions of the huge, impossible creatures that crowded his mind. He gave up some time after 3 beers and crawled into his tent. Sleep was slow and common. As he faded away into the twilight of dreams, a scream came rolling over the camp from the distant hills to the south. He left the tent and tilted his head, hoping to hear it again. He stood there for a few minutes, just trying to put a name to the sound. He had spent his youth with his father in the woods, but he had heard nothing like that before. An owl hooted from a nearby tree, and a pack of coyotes ranged along the valley somewhere to his right. But the other sound, it never came again. Chapter 2. Eric woke to a damp, grey morning, the sun still hiding behind the trees. He didn't expect the rest of the group for hours. He debated whether to fix breakfast for himself or drive back towards Dodge City. There was a place called the Crazy Rooster nearby that would probably do a better job with breakfast than he would. And given in to inertia though, he decided he didn't feel like driving and opted to do his own cooking. He got the fire going and dropped the bacon into the cast iron skillet. He fished a monster from the ice chest as the meat sizzled. He scrambled the eggs in the bacon drippings and rolled up his breakfast in a couple of tortillas. And with hunger sated, he put on his helmet, fired up his hyper-green sniper, and set off to explore the nearly 1,500 acres of Stony Lonesome. He decided to save the extreme trails until the rest of the crew had arrived. He'd stick to the moderate stuff that morning. When Eric headed out along the Pavilion Road, branched onto Main Road through the park and caught the 312 trail winding through the pines and black oaks. The trail wore a thin layer of mud from the damp morning air, and Eric splashed through the creek on the way to the 303. He rolled to a stop at the Blue Hole to admire the creekside view of the pavilion on the far side. He ran the 303 to the 311 and looped back to the 300 and then back to camp. He got back just before noon and, as usual, cooled his heels, waiting for the rest to drag themselves to the meeting place. Noon passed with no sign of his friends. He was in no real hurry for them to arrive. That only meant that he would have to explain Izzy's absence. He'd done it before. The story wasn't all that different. He just never enjoyed rehearsing it. And though he knew Sandy would be pushing them, it came as no surprise when they finally showed up at 1 o'clock. They were a mixture of friends, old and new. Matt, his best friend since first grade, was a brown-haired, blue-eyed glib charmer of everyone he met, a natural athlete. He was the one who had always dragged Eric away from his studies to go play ball from T-ball through high school, baseball. Matt, with a scholarship, continued to play and bask in the spotlight afforded to college athletes. Sandy befriended them both when her family moved to Alabama while she was in grade school. They remained friends even when the boys decided they didn't like girls. She could shoot as well as either of them and climb the trails they hiked better than both. Despite her good looks, they always saw her as one of the guys. When Jerry and Patty joined the group in college, they were older, art majors living together off campus in a house Jerry's grandparents had left him. Their shared red hair often got them mistaken for brother and sister, causing their public displays of affection to raise eyebrows. Matt, Sandy, and Patty began moving their gear into the tents that Eric had set up, while he and Jerry unloaded a Kawasaki mule from the trailer. "Where's Izzy?" Sandy asked. She's not coming," Eric said, the words dripping with rancor. "What happened this time?" Sandy asked. Let me answer that," Matt broke in. "Nice guys finish last, and he's just too freaking nice. That fancy green Jeep catches girls' eyes, but then—" "I didn't bother," Eric interrupted. Yeah, Matt cut him off. "We've all heard that story, but no one believes it. It's not that a bright color doesn't add flash and catch in their eyes. The trouble is the driver. Well, he's a perpetual friend material. That was the last line, right, Eric? We can still be friends." "Screw you," Eric answered with a upraised middle finger. "Nah," Matt said, shaking his head. "Nice guys aren't even in the race. All that stuff about sharing your feelings, telling the truth and being open. Man, you do that, and it's the same sweet let's be friends song. Of course they will deny it to your face, but uncertainty about a man's character, especially if it seems a little shady, that's a chick magnet." "Cheer up," Jerry said. "At least this one's interested enough to bother dumping you." "She dumped you?" Sandy said. "I thought you just meant she was doing something else this weekend. What happened? She was perfect for you." True," Eric admitted. "Too perfect as it turned out. She came over for me to critique her writing assignment. Well, it wasn't perfect either. When I saw that my comments hurt her feelings, I apologized. But, no," Matt groaned. "You didn't. I told you to stop doing that. It's a one-way ticket to the romance-free zone." "Stop doing what?" Sandy asked. "Apologizing? What's wrong with an apology?" "That screams, let's be friends," Matt said. "Well, that's weak," Jerry agreed. "Especially coming from a man." "You apologized and she dumped you?" "Thank you, Sandy, for making my point," Matt said. "Shut up, Matt. What an asshole." "True, but an asshole with a girl." 3 girls, if my count is accurate," Eric said. "True again," Matt said with a chuckle. "And speaking of attraction to assholes, you still banging that married guy, aren't you, Sandy?" "Patty," Sandy said, "help me out here." "You leave me out of this," she said, holding both palms up. "But I would utterly hate it if Jerry got all gentlemanly, opening doors and bringing flowers and all that stuff. Eric does. It's just plain silly to me." "That's my girl," Jerry said and gave her arm a pat. "That's why we are out here, to crash these courses and have fun instead of making Google eyes at each other and sipping wine by the fire." "A little wine and fire will be nice once in a while," Patty said. Eric's pocket buzzed, vibrated and played a deep bass riff. He stood and hurriedly dug into his pocket for the phone. "You carrying your phone?" Matt groaned. "That's not her calling. She's not going to call." Sandy punched him in the shoulder and laid a finger to his lips. Eric held the phone to his ear as he walked out of the circle to hold an extended mumbled conversation. "Was it Izzy?" Sandy asked when he returned. "No," he told her, "but I do have a date this evening." "You're kidding," Matt said with a chuckle. "Way to go, bro." "Who is it?" Sandy asked. "Do we know her?" "No," Eric said. "And you're not going to meet her." "Why not?" Sandy protested. She's ugly," Matt said and got up to grab a drink from the ice chest. "No, It's our first date, Eric said. I'm not exposing her to the likes of y'all. We're going for a little ride, and that's all. Speaking of rides, Jerry broke in. Did we come to hit the trails or talk about Eric's love life? Let's go. And 2 hours later, they pulled back up at the park office, covered in mud and sporting enormous smiles. That was insane, Patty cried, pulling off her helmet and shaking out her hair. Freaking awesome, Matt added. Eric, grab that hose. Jerry called to him. Let's get some of this mud off. Eric bent to pick up the hose, and as his hand reached out for it, a pair of boots stepped into his peripheral vision. Are you Eric McCarty? A musical voice asked. He slowly raised his head, eyes drinking in the beauty standing in front of him. For a moment, he wasn't sure who she was. Sable hair streaked with blonde highlights fell around bare shoulders. Her pink lips curved up into a wide smile. Hazel eyes, with a hint of almond-shaped twinkled above high cheeks. Yeah, I'm Eric. He stumbled over the words. He stuck out a muddy hand and quickly wiped it on his pants and tried again. Beth Townsend, she said, taking his hand. The touch sent a pleasant tingle to his heart, and Eric had a sudden mental picture of himself smiling like a fool. Hey, Eric, who's your friend? Sandy said, stepping up beside him with a smile. Whoever it is, pass the hose, Jerry called from behind him. Excuse me, Eric said. He turned on the hose and took it to Jerry, washing off himself on the way. When he started back to Beth, he saw her in conversation with Matt. He stood, shoulders slumped, and felt his heart wither at the sight. So, Beth, how do you know Eric? He heard Sandy ask. I don't really, she replied. Earlier today was my first time to speak with him. His withered heart turned icy cold. He started to move, rushing to cut the conversation off before she said the words he dreaded. He filed a report with our organization yesterday, Beth said. I'm here to investigate a little further. Beth, let's... A report? Matt cut him off. What kind of report? A Bigfoot sighting, Beth said. I'm with the Alabama Bigfoot Project. Did y'all see it too? Let's talk over here, Eric said and pulled her away before the stunned silence broke down. You haven't told them, Beth said when they were out of earshot. No, not yet. Why? Am I supposed to? You can tell or not tell. Anyone you like, she said, a trace of irritation in her voice. I just assumed. That's okay, he said. I was going to tell them. Just maybe not everyone all at once. I'd love to tell you, though. What I'd really like to do is go to the site. Can you find the exact spot again? Sure, Eric said, looking over his shoulder. It's a few miles back up the highway. Should we take my Jeep? If you don't mind, Beth answered. My pleasure. Wait right here, he told her. I'll go get it. He asked Matt to take him back to the campground. Much to Eric's dismay, Matt immediately pawned the job off onto Sandy. She jumped behind the wheel of Eric's sniper and waited for him to get in beside her. Pretty girl, she said. It's none of my business, but ignore those creeps. Eric, be yourself. She's just here to follow up on my report, Eric said. That may be, Sandy told him. But she got here quickly. Obviously local. Beautiful. And you are in the market for a girl, so don't let her get away. But she's just... Liar, she said. I saw your eyes bug out when you saw her. Before she leaves, ask her out. Trust me on this. Okay, he agreed. But getting the cold shoulder twice in one camping trip, it's going to do some serious damage to my ego. You can handle it, Sandy assured him. You'll get nowhere if you don't try. I try, and I still get nowhere now, Eric said with a chuckle. Sandy pulled up beside Eric's Gladiator and let him out. He wasn't sure about hitting on someone he'd just met, someone who had no interest beyond finding out what he had seen. However, he had to admit Sandy had a point. He couldn't do any worse than he already was, could he? But he shivered a little bit at the possibility that maybe he could, indeed. Eric slid into the driver's seat and punched the ignition button. The Jeep fired up and he drove back up and over the hill to the office where Beth waited. Matt had already engaged the beauty in conversation. It was not surprising, but no less disheartening. Yep, not even in this race, he thought with a sigh. Beth detached herself from Matt when he rode up beside them. Matt, not as eager to part, followed her to Eric's truck. Hang around for a beer when y'all get back, Matt said as she climbed into the passenger door. Beth closed the door quickly behind her without answering him. Eric looked away and smiled at a look of disappointment on his friend's face. Thank God he didn't get in beside her, Eric thought. He drove away before giving Matt another chance at that. When Beth turned to look at him, though, he feared the damage was already done. One of the cool guys, huh? She said with a grin. Why do they never call Matt a nice guy? Eric wondered. Because he's not nice. He's cool. Big difference. Have you been friends for a long time? She asked. All our lives, it seems. He mumbled with a heavy sigh he couldn't hide. Something wrong? Nothing out of the ordinary, he complained. Same shit, different day. Let's just get this over with so you can go back and have your beer with Matt. What? Her eyes flashed a stony grey. I'm here to investigate your sighting. You do want me to do that, right? Sure, he said. No worries. They passed the next few miles in an icy silence. Eric knew he was rude, but for once he was determined not to apologize. He pulled the Jeep over to the narrow shoulder, and Beth sat unmoving for a long moment, her arms crossed over her chest, her frown set in granite. This is the place, he told her, pointing to the spot where the creature had stopped to look back at him. I crossed the road here and stood just back in those trees. She hesitated a bit before relaxing her arms and reaching for the door handle. She nodded quickly and slipped out of the door. Eric walked around the truck to meet her at the edge of the woods. Look, he said. I'm sorry. The words were out before he could stop them. I was disrespectful and rude. That's not me. But it's a long story. Not the one you came here for me to tell. Her head tilted slightly as she looked his way. He saw her face relax. Her eyes reclaimed the greenish tint he remembered. Submitted for your approval. One Eric McCarty, lovable loser, caught between beauty and manly zing and a place known as a friend zone. So, walk me over the ground, she said, her voice softer then. Eric led her across the highway to where he first saw the creature, and then led her along the path it had followed. They stopped back in the trees, searching the ground for tracks and the trees for hair samples. Beth did not seem discouraged by the lack of evidence. She found a clear spot and sat down against the tree. It'll be dark soon, she said. Let's wait here until then. He sat down against a neighbouring tree, leaning his head back and listening to the birds flitting among the branches overhead. He wasn't sure just what she was up to. We have a little time, Beth said. You want to tell me the short version of your long story? I think that would only bury me deeper, he told her, but he managed a little chuckle. Let's just say I'm a loser. Let it go. I don't believe that, she said. You seem like such a nice guy. Therein lies the rub, he said with a shake of his head and a deep sigh. Nice guys. Well, we finished last. Who are you racing? Every other guy, he said. Guys like Matt. Matt struck me as a player. She looked over at him. A very successful one at that, Eric said. So why were you angry? She paused. Her eyes suddenly brightened. Oh, you... really? She scrambled to her feet, brushing the leaves from her jeans. Eric wasn't sure what he was expecting next, but when she picked up a heavy stick, he was a little concerned for his safety. Come on, she told him, with a wave for him to follow. She worked her way through the second growth saplings and bushes to the foot of a large oak tree, and there, where the shadows closed in to full darkness, she leaned the stick against the tree, cupped her hands to her mouth, and loosed 3 of the most chilling calls he had ever heard. Did all of that just come from that tiny woman? Retrieving her stick, she swung it like a baseball bat against the oak, seemingly satisfied with whatever all that meant. She signaled for him to keep quiet, while she stood, head tilted, listening. He did the same, not sure just what he was supposed to hear. The answer came from the dark hills to the south, and 2 of the same howls Beth had used came rolling over the treetops. He shivered at the sound. Was that one of them? Yes, it was, she told him. I was pretty far away, but definitely a Sasquatch. Really? So, you believe me? Of course. I've always believed you. You're probably going to take a lot of ribbon when you get back to your camp, if you're brave enough to do that. But why wouldn't I believe you? Let's head back to your truck now. He drove them back, the encounter of the day before battling in his head with what he just heard a few minutes earlier. It was so surreal. Impossible is what he would have said 2 days prior. But here he was, enlisting in the ranks of the nutcases who saw UFOs, ghosts, and Bigfoot. I would accept that offer of a beer, she said, smiling over at him. If you're the one to ask me. You're kidding, he said. I mean, really? Would you? I said I would, she told him, still smiling. I always try to keep my word. And don't fret about Matt. Girls who go out with guys like him, they're fools. Eric turned into the entrance at Stony Lonesome and followed the road around to the campsite. Matt came out to meet them and ushered Beth to the campfire. She ignored his offer of a chair and chose one next to Eric. So, tell us what's going on, Sandy said, and leave nothing out. Yeah, Jerry added. Let's hear it. When Eric finished, Matt commented, Well, if y'all weren't just a mile or 2 down the road, I'm surprised we didn't hear either of you calling. Beth or the Bigfoot's howl. What do you think about calling him again so we can all hear it? And Sandy squealed. Don't you dare, she protested. If something answered, I wouldn't sleep all night. Chapter 3. Eric woke early to the sound of birds singing. He crawled from his sleeping bag and out into the cool morning air. He ran a hand through his hair and stretched. A sudden desire for coffee led him in search of water. He found a nearby hydrant and filled the empty pot, returned and rummaged through their supplies for the coffee. Sandy emerged about the time brown liquid began to flash in the tiny glass bulb at the percolator. She returned from the bathroom in time to catch him pouring the brown liquid into cups. Tell me about Beth, she said, dropping into a chair by the fire. What? Huh? Eric gave her a bewildered look. What about her? She had a beer and went back to her office. What's to tell? I hope you're being facetious, Sandy told him. That girl likes you, and if you didn't pick up on that, then you might be as bad off as Matt says you are. Well, there may be hope, Eric said. I apologized to her and came right out and told her I'm a nice guy. And she came for a beer anyway. You have her number, right? A broad smile spread slowly over his face as he felt his cheeks flush. Eric pulled his phone from his pocket and wiggled it in the air. I got her personal number, he said, beaming. Way to go, Eric. Call her now. Now? Yes, now. Invite her to ride with you. Eric walked away before dialing the number. He saw no good in letting Sandy watch him get shut down. However, he returned minutes later, his smile still in place. She said yes, he exclaimed with a victory fist pump. She will be here in an hour or 2. Don't tell the rest, okay? That'll teach them to sleep in, Sandy agreed. Eric steered the sniper to a stop at the pavilion at the Blue Hole. He and Sandy climbed out for a walk down the creek. He rinsed his hands in the water before scooping it up to splash on his face, washing away the dust and sweat. He was looking for a shady spot to lean against when his pocket vibrated. He glanced at the screen and smiled. It was Beth. The phone made a loud click as he tried to put it to his ear. Hang on a sec, he said and took off his helmet. Sandy shook her head and laughed at him, and mouthed the words, "Calm down." Hi, Beth, he said with an undistinguished pleasure. Great. Be right there. He hung up and stuffed the phone back in his pocket. He threw his helmet on and set out for the sniper at a jog. Whoa, stop right there, Sandy commanded. The shouted order brought him to an abrupt halt, and he scanned the ground at his feet for a snake he expected to see. The only threat he found was in his friend's voice, and Sandy took him by the elbow and turned him around. Under the stern look, he thought he saw a touch of amusement on her face. Look, she said, and a smile spread over her lips. I know you're excited she's here. That's all right. But hide just a little bit of it, okay? You wanted to know that you like her and you're glad to see her, not think you're desperate. Eric opened his mouth to speak and closed it again and tilted his head as Matt's voice raced over his thoughts. I know what you're thinking, Sandy said. So forget what Matt has told you. Listen to me. She likes you. Be yourself. Just a calmer, more in control self. Your normal self. He surprised them both by giving Sandy a quick peck on the cheek. Thanks, he said. And dropping Sandy off at the camp, he took off without giving Matt a chance to take the buggy out. Hey, where you going? Matt shouted after him. Eric continued to ignore his friend's shouts and drove up the hill to the lot near the park office. He didn't see her at first glance. Then he realized the three guys standing near the porch with their backs to him were focused on a fourth person. Beth was wearing a red Fox racing pants and a form-fitting, matching red t-shirt with party-like, a motto stretched across her chest, a helmet resting between her hip and right arm. When he pulled up, she nodded to the trio and said something to them that he couldn't hear and pushed their way through towards his sniper. Their heads swiveled as she passed by and admiring looks followed her. Eric jumped out and hustled over to open the door for her. Well, thank you again, she said. Do you always open doors for helpless females? No, he replied quickly. I always open them for women I respect. He closed the door as she settled into her seat and returned to the driver's side. Climbing in behind the wheel, he paused in thought for a moment and then turned to her. Unless you would like to drive, he asked. A devilish smile lit her face, sparking a twinkle in her hazel eyes. She opened the door and jerked her thumb at him. Remember, she told him with a grin as they passed. This was your idea. Beth adjusted the seat, looked his way, and patted his arm. Hang on, she said, and jammed the accelerator to the floorboard. Eric was thrown back in his seat as the tires dug in and slung gravel behind them. He took her advice and grabbed the frame on his right. The buggy rocketed out of the lot. Yee-haw! She shouted and threw the sniper around the corner towards the gate. Eric rocked forward as she hit the brakes and rolled slowly through the park entrance with a smile and a very feminine finger wave to the gatekeeper. Safely inside the park, she cranked the sniper up as fast as she dared on the main road until she hit the 401, one of the park's extreme trails, and took it splashing and crashing through the mud. Holy shit! Eric shouted when they were back on the main road and he could breathe again. That was intense. Without bothering to wipe away the mud, she grabbed him by the visor on his helmet, pulled him to her, and kissed him. I'm gonna have to revise my definition of intense, he said when they finally pulled away from each other. She replied by stomping the accelerator. Eric groped for the frame and held on. I think flat out is her only speed, he thought. Lucky me, I hope. They slid to a halt back at the campsite, laughing and dripping wet after hosing the mud off themselves and the sniper. Matt and Jerry stared wide-eyed at Beth as she climbed out from behind the wheel, pulled off her helmet, and shook out her hair. Okay, Eric said. Your turn, Matt. No need to hurry back. I think we're done for the day. Hi, Sandy. Good to see you again, Beth said. She dropped down in a chair beside Sandy while Eric went to get them something to drink. "I take it you and Eric had fun." "Oh, yeah," she said. "He's a great kisser." Eric felt the heat rise in his face under his friend's scrutiny. He stumbled over his own feet, but safely claimed the chair next to Beth. "Oh, he is?" Sandy said with a mock surprise. "I didn't know that. Did you, Patty?" "Why, no." Patty joined in the fun. "Tell us more." "I think that's enough, for now," Eric protested. "He is," Beth mouthed at her female companions, with a wrinkle of her nose and a quick nod. Eric slid down in his chair, but there was no escaping the friendly laughter at his expense. He felt strangely at ease, having a woman who seemed interested in him laugh and joke with his friends. It was a new experience. It was about to be short-lived. "Beth," Sandy said, suddenly serious again. "What happens with your report about Eric's, what do you call it? Vision? Sighting? Incident? We prefer encounter," Beth said, not missing a beat at a turn at the conversation. "Well, we store it in our database to help track locations and conditions that surround Bigfoot sightings in a geographic area. Actually, I was hoping Eric might take me back to the site this evening." Do you think it's still around?" Patty asked. "Oh, that's mondo creepy." "Please say it's not," Sandy said. "I honestly don't know," Beth told him. "It was yesterday at twilight, but who can say now?" "You, I hope," Sandy answered. "Oh, I'd like to find out for sure," Beth said. "Wouldn't you?" You suggesting we go hunting for it?" Eric asked. "Yeah." Beth gave him a gentle nudge with her elbow. "You in?" Well played, Eric thought. Well, he was trapped and he knew it. He couldn't back out without disappointing the woman he hoped to impress. Agreeing to go meant doubling down on his commitment to the story that made him a laughing stock with his friends. Beth or his friends, no time for deliberation. Choose. "Sure, I'm in," he responded with a sudden flash of inspiration. He looked over at Sandy and Patty. "What about y'all? You're not scared, are you?" And from the corner of his eye, he saw Beth lay her fingers on her lips, suppressing a chuckle. Well, Patty and Sandy exchanged shocked glances, and Eric smiled and shrugged as they turned their eyes his way. "Come on," Beth prodded. "It'll be fun. We'll go just before sunset and make the guys go along." What the hell," Sandy said. "I'm in." "Me too," Patty added. When the clouds gathering at the western horizon glowed a flaming orange, the guys returned. They turned out to be more resistant to the idea of searching for Bigfoot than the ladies. Matt declined the invitation in order to pursue a blonde with a four-wheeler, and Jerry lured Patty away with promises of romance on her evening ride. "Come on, Sandy," Beth said as she busied herself stowing a box she'd bought in Eric's truck. "No, y'all go ahead," came the dejected sounding reply. Beth walked over to the stand beside Sandy and bent to whisper in her ear. The girl burst out laughing at whatever secret passed between them, rose from her chair, and began making ready to go. Eric wondered what sort of magic Beth did on his friend. Sandy was not the one to change her mind that easily. Her coming along meant he and Beth would not be alone. But gambling that Beth would be around for a while, he was not disappointed that Sandy was coming with them, as would have been the case in his past relationships. Beth was different somehow. That she had invited Sandy and then set her at ease was proof enough of that. He would have to remember to ask about her secret. He didn't really think they would still find anything of the creature, but a trip together would be a pleasant start to a night he didn't want to end. "I know you're with the research group," Sandy said when they were actually underway. "But have you actually seen one of these things?" No, not exactly seen one," Beth said. "However, once when I was young, my father took us camping. We were traveling in a truck with a camper shell, and we pulled a small trailer behind it. The trailer was still hitched to the truck when we went to bed. My sister and I slept in the trailer, Mum and Dad in the camper on the truck. We were just about asleep when the front of the trailer suddenly dipped down, nearly throwing us out of bed. I heard Mum scream from the truck. And just as I stood up, the trailer bounced back on its springs, dumping me onto the floor. My sister and I rushed outside to see what was going on. What the hell happened then? We saw my parents, and they told us the same violent rocking had happened to the truck. It was like someone had dropped an enormous weight on the hitch where they were connected. But there was no one else in sight for miles. What was it? Sandy asked. We never knew for sure, Beth told her. We heard something off in the distance. A little later that sounded like a pack of coyotes. Dad said it wasn't coyotes, but he never really talked about it after that. I got the impression that whatever it was, it scared him. You think it was Bigfoot? Eric asked. I don't know, but I was very curious and spent a lot of time in the library trying to find out what it could be. I didn't come across anything else capable of doing that, except Bigfoot. Anyway, that interested me in them ever since. Do they ever hurt people? Sandy asked. It's rare, Beth said. I probably shouldn't tell you this before we go walking into the woods, but I'm going to, just so you'll be careful. We're here, Eric announced. Tell your story and then we'll get out. Oh, not, Sandy added with a laugh. It's not really my story, Beth said. This was told by Teddy Roosevelt back in 1892. The Teddy Roosevelt? Eric asked. The historical president? Yes, but he wasn't president at the time, Beth told him. According to Roosevelt, he had a friend named Bowman. Like Roosevelt, he was an outdoorsman and a hunter. Bowman lived in the wild for much of his life. One day, he and his partner found this spot that looked promising for trapping. They decided to give it a try. They set up camp and went off exploring the area. When they returned to camp, they found something had trashed it. They assumed it was a bear, but found tracks that said, "This bear?" I was walking around on 2 feet. Bears do that, though, Sandy said. True, but it's not their usual method, Beth told her. That night, noises awakened them, and they caught glimpses of a massive creature in the darkness. They fired a couple of shots at it, and the creature ran off. I think I would have been the one doing the running, Sandy said with a little laugh. Yeah, so the next day they returned from checking their traps and found the camp smashed up again. The creature came back once more during the night. I'd stayed away from the fire and the lights, but it made a tremendous racket in the surrounding woods. Yep, I heard inexplicable noises in the woods at night, Eric said. Wonder if I was hearing Sasquatch then. So, the two men decided to cut their trip short as soon as it was light, and Bowman went off alone to collect some remaining traps. He returned hours later to find his partner had been killed. He had apparently been flung around the campsite. His neck was broken and bitten, but the rest of him, I was still intact. Where did this happen? Eric asked. Idaho, at the fork of the Salmon River, near the headwaters of the Wisdom. Roosevelt apparently thought the story genuine enough to repeat it with the assumption the culprit was some kind of North American ape-like creature. It was frequently mentioned in native lore. And you think it was a Bigfoot? Eric asked. Yes, most Bigfoot researchers lean that way, she said. Well, that kind of makes me feel like a real explorer, Sandy said. Oh, and Eric, by the way, I'm sorry for laughing at your story. Welcome to the lunatic fringe, Beth said with a grin. Well, fellow crazies, Eric said, opening the door. Shall we? Chapter 4. The sun had settled beneath the treetops to the west, leaving a dense stand of oaks in deep twilight a few minutes from darkness. Beth retrieved the box she brought from the floor beneath her seat. What is that, anyway? Eric asked. Fleur, Beth said, taking a long-handled camera from the box. Forward-looking infrared. A heat-seeking camera to see in the dark and I have these for y'all." She handed small headlamps to Sandy and Eric before slipping on one of her own. "Wow, you are a very serious woman," Sandy said. "You got that right," Beth said, waving for them to follow. Eric brought up the rear as they moved along the narrow game trail that led off into the oaks and pines. They ambled through the trees, careful to be as quiet as possible. The sounds of cars passing on the highway behind them faded to a whisper when Beth came to an abrupt halt. "Ew, what's that smell?" Sandy asked. "Smells like something's dead," Eric added. "Shh." Beth shushed them. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees with her infrared detector. She shook her head and turned to Eric when the sound of wood splintering came from the trees in front of them. Beth swung the infrared around towards the sound. "Let's get out of here," Sandy said, panic creeping into her voice. The sounds of the forest died around them. The scent of rotting meat grew more intense. A loud thud came from a limb clubbing an oak tree just behind them, followed by the sound of something falling through the branches. A rock the size of a softball landed at the base of the tree and rolled up against Eric's boots. Sandy gasped and grabbed him by the arm. "Look," Beth said, pointing at her camera. Eric stepped closer to look at the tiny screen, pulling Sandy, still fastened to his arm, along with him. He leaned over Beth's shoulder and saw the screen was almost completely filled with a bright red glow. Another missile passed overhead and came crashing down through the branches. Sandy screamed and tried to run, but Eric held her fast. "Don't run," he said in her ear. "You run off in panic and you get lost out here in the dark. Stay here with us." "I got what we need," Beth said. "Let's go, but take it slow." As they backed away down the trail, the woods came violently alive. A massive body charged towards them, snapping limbs as it came and shaking the ground beneath them. Sandy broke free of Eric and ran screaming down the trail. Beth gave him a push in the same direction in which Sandy had fled. "Not the time to be brave," she said, and pushed by him. Eric turned to face the oncoming rush of sound, more stunned than fearless. Their pursuer suddenly broke off in the charge. A limb sailed by Eric's head, followed by an animal roar, unlike anything he had ever heard. He clamped his hands over his ears. The sound vibrated over his skin and reverberated in his chest. He stood unable to move for what seemed to him an eternity. A loud grunt came from the woods, and he found he could move again. Eric turned and trotted down the trail after Beth. "Hey, wait for me," he called after them. He caught up with the women at the truck, and Beth had Sandy wrapped tightly in her arms and was gently stroking her head against the sobs he could hear yards away. He pushed the remote entry button on his key fob, unlocking the Jeep, and Beth opened the door, tucked Sandy into the back seat, and closed her inside. "Oh my God," Beth shouted, jumping up and down. "That was incredible! I've never experienced anything like that before." "I never want to ever again," Eric told her. "Let's get out of here before Sandy falls apart." On a ride back to Stony Lonesome, Eric was caught up in a strange kind of watching, a three-way tennis match. His eyes flitting between the road to the barely suppressed excitement in Beth's demeanor to Sandy's trembling hands. The emotion swirling around him left little space to process his own feelings about what had happened. Beth turned within the confines of the seatbelt and held out a hand to Sandy. Shaky fingers reached down from the back seat to be closed on by those of a friend. "It's okay now," Beth assured her. "I want to go home," Sandy cried. "Eric, promise me you'll take me home." "Sandy, How about if I stay with you tonight?" Beth said and looked Eric's way. "Okay," she mouthed to him. He breathed a sigh of relief and nodded in agreement as he pulled into the park. He hoped the less threatening surroundings and the company of friends would take the edge of Sandy's fears. Whatever he was feeling, a 125-mile road trip was not an option he cared to contemplate. "It'll be all right," Eric said. "Beth can sleep in a tent with you. It will be safe with all the other people camped around us."
"Are you sure, Beth?"
Sandy asked. He thought her voice sounded stronger. That was going to work. Jerry and Patty had a fire going when they pulled up. Beth leaned close and whispered something to Sandy as she helped her from the truck. When Sandy burst into a laugh, Eric again had to admire Beth's magic. Seated around the fire, emotion somewhat subdued with alcohol, he leaned over to whisper in Beth's ear. "Okay," he said. "I want to know your secret. What did you whisper to Sandy?" And she chuckled and moved her lips close to his ear. "Before we left," she said, "I told her to come along because I was not planning on jumping your bones in the woods on the second date. When we got back, I reminded her of my promise and asked her to keep an eye on me tonight to see that I keep my word." And a beer burned a path through Eric's nose. Beth slapped his back as everyone waited with worried looks for him to stop coughing. "He asked what I said to you at the truck," she explained to Sandy, who joined in the laughter. Later, Eric held Beth close and hummed a corny rendition of Stars Fell on Alabama as they swayed together at the door to Sandy's tent. "I guess that sounded stupid," he said. Beth drew away and punched him in the shoulder. "Don't ever say anything like that again," she told him. "That was the sweetest thing any guy ever did. If you change now, we're through, mister." "So," he said, "we have a future after tonight? After Bigfoot?" "Oh, that's up to you," Beth said. "Just remember, I have your home address and I will come looking for you if you don't call me the minute you're back home." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Sandy said from inside the tent. "Kiss her, Eric. We have to get up early in the morning." "You heard the lady," Eric said. His lips met hers, and deep in his nice guy heart, hope, I was reborn. Wow, 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 wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding and quite a heartwarming story there from the incredible mind of Jack LaFountain. What an absolutely awesome collection of stories in this book, Jack. It really is such an honor to cover your work and have the exclusive drops each and every time you bring out a new addition to your collection. I really hope that the sales are going well and we've helped to build some of the anticipation and momentum behind that. Thank you for all you do, your input, your friendship and support, brother. It really does mean the world. Well, guys and girls, why not show some love and support and also treat yourself or a loved one to an incredible classic in the making. You'll find the links to Jack's necessary sites in the description box below the video. Please do take a second to jump on that and order yourself a real classic to add to your collection. Oh, and don't forget to go back and leave a great review and hit the 5-star marker, because it really helps Jack build a presence as a writer on the Amazon platform. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill here. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. I'm going to be putting this together as one story in one video, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. But of course, if you've got the minerals and you think you can pen the next big hit, then please do get in touch with me at the brand new email address, which is contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's had a fantastic week at work or school or studying. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're taking a fight back to life and reaching for greatness and settling for nothing less. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.